I'm going to get a lot of hate for this video, but I really think it can help a lot of people land a job in software and even help with their local development process. So when a company is looking to hire a software developer, what they're really looking for is somebody that can come in and create code for them that they can then monetize. And if you don't have any work experience, then it's really difficult to prove to that company that you're the person that could come in and create this code for them. Even if you do have work experience, the experience that you do have is probably on private repositories. And so you can't really show them this is what I've created in the past, and then therefore this is what I can do for you. So one way to get around that is to create a portfolio project. And a portfolio project is something that you create on the side outside of your working hours. And it's supposed to be something where you can say to a hiring manager, hey, this is the sort of quality of code that I can produce for you. So one of the problems with those portfolio projects is that hiring managers are really short on time. So when they're looking to hire a developer, they're probably going through hundreds of different applications. And so they don't really have time to really comb through every line of code inside of your portfolio project. What they really want to do is they want to get it up and running, and they want to see that it works as they would expect it to work. So if we have a look at this example here, this is a portfolio project for a friend of mine. And if we come down to the installation instructions here, you can see that this is quite long. So we have a installation instruction for the server. So you're going to run npm install, you've got to create a database, and then you've got to go to the client, you've got to install there. And then you have to get both of these things up and running, and then you can finally start looking at the project that they've created. In reality, a hiring manager is not going to do any of these things here. What they really want to do is they want to be able to clone your project, run one command, and have it up and running so they can see that it's working. So in this video, I'm going to show you how you can do that with Docker. So if you follow this process with Docker, it can actually make for a really good local development experience as well, because we're going to get live reloads running in the container, and you don't have to set up all these other dependencies like your database, your metrics, and all that sort of stuff. All you have to do is run one command and you're good to go. You can start developing. So if we have a look in the package.json here, you can see that we have one command here, and this is docker dev. Obviously this command can be whatever you want. And so this is going to run docker compose, and -f is saying, look at this docker compose file. And we have one Docker Compose file here. And then the magic of this is that we have a second Docker Compose file, and this is for running locally in our dev environment. And this just alters the configuration of this Docker Compose file just a little bit. Then we're going to run the up command, obviously, because we want our containers to come up. And we're going to run it with -d, which means run this in detached mode. So your terminal is going to be free once this is up and running. So if we go over to our terminal here, you can see this in action. We can run pnpm docker dev. So pnpm requires that the hiring manager has pnpm installed on their computer. So you could replace this with npm. So let's try that, and that's going to work as well. And of course, this needs to be npm run. So you can see here that we're pulling a few containers. The first one is our database. And in this project, I'm using Postgres, but you can use any database that you like. Okay, so this is finished. This took probably about a minute to get started. And we have two containers. We have my database and we have my API. So if we come over to the Docker desktop app here and we expand this here, you can see that we have our two containers here. So we can go into API and we can see our logs here. Now let's go change a file and make sure that our server restarts when we change a file. So I'm just going to come over and press save on any file in here. And you can see that our server is restarting successfully. So one thing with developing locally is that you want to be able to see these logs in your terminal. You don't want to have to come over to Docker. So let's go do that now. So we can do Docker logs, and then we want to get the logs from a container by its name. And in this case, it's API. So say API, and then we want to do -- follow. And you can see that we're going to get our logs in our terminal here. Let's save this again. And you can see that we're getting live reloads of our logs here. Okay, so let's dive in and see how I set this up. So there's three files here that you need to take note of. One is this Docker file. The next is this Docker Compose file, and then our Docker Compose dev file. So let's dive into the Docker file and see what's going on in here. And you can see that it's actually fairly simple to get this started. So we're going to say from, and this is our base image. I'm going to use Node 20, and I'm using the Alpine version. The Alpine version is just a little bit smaller. Then I'm going to set my working directory. This is the working directory in the container that you want to install your app, essentially. If you don't set this, Docker will set one for you, and it's just best practice to set this yourself. Then we're going to copy in our package JSON and our PNPM lock file, and we're going to copy that into essentially our app directory. Then we're going to run npm install with the global flag PNPM, and the reason for that is because I'm using PNPM as my package manager, and so PNPM needs to be available so I can use PNPM install. Then we're going to do our PNPM install. Then we're going to copy the rest of our application code into the container, and then we're going to run PNPM build, and then build is just inside of my package JSON here. You can see that all it does is run TSC. Then we're going to expose port 4000. I'm exposing port 4000 because that is the port that my application is running on. And then I'm going to run it with this simple command here. And this is going to run node. And then this is going to run the build source and our main.js file here. So I haven't built this locally, but we can do that with PNPM install and PNPM build. And then once our application has been built, we can see that we get this build directory here, and inside of there we have source, and then we have our main.js, and that is what this command here is running. But of course, we're going to be doing this inside of the container. The next file we have is our Docker Compose file. And inside of our Docker Compose file here, I only have one service running, and that is my API. And version 3.8 is what version of Docker Compose that you want to use. So I'm going to name this API, and then I'm going to specify a container name. And if we go back into the Docker desktop app, you can see that we have the container name API here. And the reason that I did that is because we want to do this Docker logs and then get the container name. And we want to specify this ourselves, so we know that we can always use this command here to see our logs. Otherwise, Docker is going to assign a name to the container for you. Then we're just going to specify the build, the context, and the Docker file that we're using, which is this Docker file here that we went over just before. Then I'm going to specify that I want to expose port 4000 to my external port 4000. So when I hit localhost port 4000 in my browser, I'm hitting Docker, and then Docker is going to forward that to the 4000 that is exposed inside of the container. So we could have our app running on port 3000, for example, but expose port 4000 externally so we can hit it on port 4000 externally. I just don't really have any need to do that. So I'm going to map these 4000 to 4000. Okay, so you'll notice that I have this commented out here. This is another really nice thing to do for your applications, both locally and for your portfolio applications, and that is to run an instance of Prometheus and an instance of Grafana. And so Prometheus can be used to capture metrics about your application, such as event loop lag, memory usage, all that sort of stuff. And then Grafana can be used to visualize that data. So I'm not going to go over that in this video. If you want to see another video on Prometheus and Grafana, let me know in the comment section below. Okay, so the next file is our Docker Compose dev. So our Docker Compose dev is again going to be using version 3.8 of Docker Compose, but you'll see in here that we have a database as well. Now, you could move this database to our Docker Compose file here, but I put this in the dev section because I'm sort of assuming if you're running this application in production, you don't also want to start up a database that's going to be on a managed service or in a different container or something like that. So I'm just starting up a database that can be used locally. And if you do want to use this database in production, of course, don't specify the username and password inside of your Docker Compose file like this. But because this is only for local development, this here is perfectly fine. Again, I'm specifying a container name so I can see the logs really easily. I'm going to use Postgres version 13 as my image. Then I'm going to expose 5432 to 5432. This is just Postgres's default container. If you're not using Postgres and you're using Mongo, of course, just switch out this image and change the configuration to match Mongo or whatever database it is that you're using. You can also have a database like Redis run alongside this if you like. And it's really easy to get those sort of third-party services up and running locally without any hassle at all. Then we're going to specify a volume. So a volume for your database is really important because if we kill the container, we don't want to erase all of the data. That could be really annoying. Then I'm going to specify some environment variables. This is just my Postgres user, my password, and then the database that I'm going to be using. So I need to use this as an environment variable inside of my API. And you can see if we jump down to API, we have environment, and then we have our database URL. So our database URL is made up of components from this environment variable here. So we have our database, we have our user, our container. This DB here is referring to this container, and then the port that it's running on, and /Postgres. So if you want to change the password to say password1, then of course you'll just need to change this down here. And then this is also going to work exactly the same. The next thing I'm doing is specifying a command. So the command that I want to run is pnpm-dev. If we go back to our package.json, you can see that this is just running TSX in watch mode. And this is how we get our restarting of the application inside of the container when we update our files locally. We're also going to mount these volumes. So our volume here is going to be our app, and then we're going to mount our app and node modules. So these volumes are also very important for our live reloading. If we don't mount the volume, then our watch command here is not going to know that the file has changed because the file won't exist inside of the container, or the container won't have access to the volume that has the file. That makes sense. The next thing I'm doing is saying depends on database, because of course we can't start up our API until our database has started up as well. So I'm sort of specifying a chain of dependencies here. And the last thing to do is to create our volume for our Postgres data. So I really hope that that helps with your portfolio project or even your local development experience. Let me know in the comment section below what you're building for your portfolio. If you like this video, please make sure you leave a thumbs up. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.